Alrighty, so today I'm going to talk about what is the correspondence bias, formerly known as the fundamental attribution error. But before I get into any definitions or anything like that, I want to talk about a classic study that illustrates this phenomenon very well. So this is the quiz game. Undergraduate subjects in a research study saw the following scenario involving two Confederates, or trained experimenters, who were pretending to be subjects themselves. Here we have one Confederate, let's call him James, and here's another Confederate. Let's call him Kevin. When they enter the lab, an experimenter says that the two Confederates are going to play the quiz game. But before we can play the quiz game, we need to randomly assign who gets the role of questioner and who gets the role of contestant. So James and Kevin pull randomly from a hat, and let's say that James gets the role of questioner and Kevin contestant. So the experimenter tells James to come up with 10 challenging but not impossible questions. After he does, the game begins, and subjects watch James ask Kevin these 10 questions. Kevin, however, answers only 4 out of the 10 questions correctly. After witnessing this interaction, subjects were asked 2 questions. First, how much general knowledge does James have? And second, how much general knowledge does Kevin have? People tended to say that James has significantly more general knowledge than Kevin, despite a clear situational constraint. Namely that James made these questions based on his own personal store of knowledge. This pattern of results is a little bit surprising, given that you could easily imagine that James might perform just as poorly as Kevin had if the roles had been switched. Subjects fail to consider and adjust for this situation, and therefore they make this potentially faulty conclusion, namely that James has more general knowledge than Kevin. And this was a study done over at Stanford University by Lee Ross and his colleagues. So this phenomenon, whereby people make a dispositional inference, an inference about the person himself, while failing to consider situational factors, is called the correspondence bias. And we have the name correspondence bias because this is all about a tendency to automatically assume that some behavior corresponds to some trait about the person who behaved. And as you can see from this not all-inclusive list of references here, this has a long history of research in social psychology. Okay, so where does the correspondence bias come from? Well, the most widely accepted view is that the correspondence bias arises out of an integrative heuristic process, which is basically just a fancy way of saying that multiple possible factors are considered at once, both dispositional ones about the person himself and situational ones about the environment. And the factors that are most salient or easy to see are going to be the ones that are included in an explanation. So the basic idea is that you can really easily see the actor behaving in a certain way, whereas you can't really see a situation. And this is why we tend to make this error about other people and not about ourselves, because the situations that we're faced with are often more salient to us. So what does this look like in everyday life? Well, imagine you're driving and someone cuts you off on the road. According to the research on the correspondence bias, you're more likely to think that this person is an aggressive person or a bad driver than to consider less salient possible situational factors. For example, maybe this person is rushing to the hospital because he just found out his wife was in a car accident. And this is just one of many examples. For example, we're likely to think that someone who gets poor grades is simply a less bright student rather than considering other situational possibilities. For example, maybe that person is battling depression or has just experienced the death of a loved one. So by being aware of the correspondence bias and working toward giving others the benefit of the doubt, we may be able to better understand the real reasons behind people's behavior, as opposed to relying on intuitions that may easily lead us astray.